Hello, everybody. Hello. I am Bill, the company's expert. How are you doing today? Welcome to Side Hustle Ideas. This is the weekly live stream where we talk about side hustles. Who knew? And our episode today. God, my cameras are not adjusted optimally, shall we say? Here we go. This is the name of this episode is called "What is Leadership? What Traits?" It's a live Q&A, and this is episode number 92. As I think I said, this is the live stream that I do once a week, every Monday, where we talk about entrepreneurship and that kind of thing. And in particular, side hustles, because side hustles are an amazing way to get into the world of entrepreneurship, where you don't really have to take many risks. I mean, you risk your time being wasted, but that's about it. And it's not really wasted, I would argue, if you are learning things, really valuable things along the way. So, yeah, we're going to talk about leadership today. A little bit of a slightly different topic for this live stream, because it's not directly related to entrepreneurship in terms of like making sales and generating a product or service, that kind of thing. But it's still important, very important. And it comes down to people working at like a sort of the low level. You know, if you are working with other people, you have other partners, or you have employees or anything like this. And, you know, there's so much crap that people talk about with regard to leadership. There's so much crap and misinformation out there that, you know, I wanted to throw in my 2 cents, basically. So, yeah, we're going to do that today. And as always, a shout out goes out to all these awesome people that are my YouTube channel members. Membership has the privileges. And my Patreons, my super thanks donors, and of course to you. Thank you for being here. You're awesome. Okay, let's get into this. We got 16 people here. Let's get cracking. Leadership. What is leadership? I think I've talked about this on my channel before. It's been a long time since I talked about sort of business topics. I'd like to do more of that in the future, but when you go to business school, you learn about management. There's sort of roughly four areas that you learn, the things that managers do, right? Planning is one of them. Controlling is another, right? Planning is when you basically figure out what your goal is and then figure out how you're going to get there, right? Controlling is kind of steering the ship. So like as you're going towards your goal, you're monitoring what's going on, and then you're steering the ship as things go awry. You're kind of getting people back on track and getting things back on track. That's controlling. So in an organization, you might have come across people that have the title controller, right? Those are usually some kind of pencil pushing accountant that's got the title controller. There's influencing, which is very central to what we're talking about today in terms of leadership, right? And there's organizing. Organizing is the planning of resources. So figuring out schedules and timeframes, figuring out people, you know, coordinating certain things, inventory, all that stuff, that's all under organizing, right? So those are kind of the four management functions. Now, influencing, basically that one of the four management functions, that's leadership, right? It's like basically the same thing. So all managers, whether you're a supervisor or you're a CEO, you do this in some measure in any kind of management type job you ever have. Some jobs are a little more one than the others, but basically you're always doing all four of these in any kind of manager type job. So leadership, you get that at every stage, right? And you get it as an entrepreneur if you're doing your own business, if you're working with anybody else, just like you would in any other management type role. So that's what frames this, really. As always, in this live stream, I challenge anyone to put in the chat any side hustle idea you have, and we can maybe discuss it. This stream is called Side Hustle Ideas, and it is an interactive Q&A. So if you're seeing my beautiful face, you should see a chat box or a chat field in the vicinity of my face, depending on what device you're watching this on. So get into the chat and start asking questions. feel free to chime in on leadership as we go. This is going to be kind of a free-form sort of discussion. And if you just have business ideas you want to talk about, that's all good. Throw it in there too. It's all good, man. Okay, so here's the deal. For those of you that are interested in this kind of thing, leadership, they used to think that leaders were born. That meant that you just had to have certain traits. You had to be tall, you had to be handsome, you had to be very, very smart, you had to be very articulate, you had to be very good looking. You had to be extrovert, you had to be a visionary, you had to be this, and you had to be that. And that's what people used to believe about leadership. And leadership is very important to human society. I mean, beyond the study of business and making money, this is also something that most obviously was studied by the military going back thousands of years, right? Because, military, you're dealing with matters of life and death, and then you want to appoint the right person to be in charge. So this was something that was studied a lot. And as you can appreciate, if your survival depends on understanding this stuff and getting it right, you probably have done a good job in figuring out how it works. So that's kind of what humans had done, right? And they noticed over time that there were certain traits that tended to lead to success. So it's very tempting to say, okay, in order to be a leader, you have to have these traits. The problem is that when they tried to study this stuff formally, not formerly, but formally, in a formal sense, like in universities, when they studied this, starting in the 1950s and 60s, they figured out that this idea that leaders are born was false. And the reason that they figured that, and they came to that conclusion, these are all these people that are the brightest people in the world that study this stuff and they push forward human knowledge, right? They concluded that that is incorrect because when you try to make a list of the traits that you need to be a leader, you can't agree on the list of traits. Just when you think that a trait is essential, you get a very famous leader that doesn't have that trait that shows that it isn't essential. And so what they found was that every single trait on the list for all the things you would think that you would need to be a leader of some kind, they found that every single one of them was optional. So therefore you couldn't really have a list of traits you need because every single one of those traits was optional. Just when you think you've got it pinned down, we can all think of a leader that doesn't have that trait that's still regarded as a great leader. Now, there's a few that I know of just off the top of my head. For example, one of the ideas is that you have to be very, very good looking. If you're a man or a woman, you have to be very handsome, very, very beautiful to be a leader that people would look up to you, right? Well, you get people like Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was famous for not being good looking, at least when he got into his 60s and 70s. When he became really famous, he was not pretty to look at, but that didn't stop anyone from looking up to him, right? You might think you need to be loud and aggressive to be a leader, barking out orders and taking charge. Look at Gandhi. Gandhi was not loud and aggressive. He was quite the opposite. Very meek, very soft-spoken. He didn't have to say a lot. What he said was straight to the point and had a lot of impact, so that kind of breaks the mold there. And you can do this for every single trait. For example, you have to be tall, well, Napoleon wasn't tall, right? And there's other examples too. I know that, historical accounts of him being super short are exaggerated, but he was certainly not tall. You've got to be kind of cool, very sort of not just good looking, but sort of fashionable and kind of stuff like that. Bill Gates is not cool and good looking. Bill Gates is a famous nerd, famous geek, not known for his trend-setting style, you have to be very emotional intelligent. You have to be, we have to read people really well and be a master of sort of like emotional intelligence and understanding that dimension to communication. Temple Grandin kind of breaks that mold. Probably the most famous person, at least that I know of, that's got clinically diagnosed autism, right? But is still famous the world over. You know what I mean? Like, there's just when you think that a trait is essential, you find that academics have found this. This is where I'm getting it. None of this is original to me. This is what they teach in business school. The people who study this stuff found that every single one of those traits, you would think to be a leader, is optional because somebody becomes a great leader that's famous beyond their years, the world over, and they don't have that trait, right? So starting in the 1950s and 60s, when they taught this stuff, they changed their conception of it, and they basically said, leaders are not born, they're made. And what the implication of that was is that anybody can be a leader. You can be made into a leader based on your experiences, what your training is, what your learning is, and what your experiences are, right? That was the idea. And that's the model that they teach today, right? Which does tend to hold up. And you can fit any world leader or any leader on any kind of level into this, right? So that's the idea. And this is kind of intuitive. It's kind of what we see, right? You go to, you get a job and you go to a place, or you go work in a company, and you're introduced to a group of people, and you see sort of people that you look up to and people that, that influence you in one way or another. And this it kind of bears out what we see. We see all types of people having an influence, right? And there's no cookie cutter mold, really, for this kind of thing. Right? So that's the implication. Let's briefly go over to comments. So, Doxer, there's a good name. Doxer, there's some implications there, if you know what I'm saying. Says, could you explain the difference between leadership and management? Okay, yeah. So within management is how to manage something. So how to be in charge of something, right? For example, if you're in charge of a business, right? The business makes money, okay? Now, in order to be in charge of it, there's different things you have to do, right? For example, like I said at the beginning, there's 4 areas of management, 4 roles that managers do: planning, influencing, organizing, and controlling, right? Planning, that has nothing to do with leading people, right? Planning is simply making a plan. I've looked at the situation, I've looked at the numbers, and I've decided this is what our goal should be, and this is our roadmap to how to get there, right? Like, that has nothing to do with influencing and dealing with other people, right? That's just a plan I'm making, right? Right, organizing. Okay, in order to make that plan, that means let's do an inventory list of the stuff we're going to need. Let's do a schedule of the time we're going to need. Let's analyze like what can be done in parallel and what has to be done in sequence, right? Let's look at money. We're going to project our spending to make this plan happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That has nothing to do with leadership, but that's part of management, right? So management is how to manage something. It incorporates several things, and one of those is leadership, and that's the component that deals with dealing with other people. In particular, it deals with how to influence other people so they behave the way you would have them behave. For example, if you're in charge, but you can't get any of your supposed employees to listen to you and do what you say, that's a problem, right? You can make a plan, and you can sort of email out to everyone what their tasks are. Here's what you need to do and what you need to do. But if you can't get people to obey you and do any of the things that you're telling them to do, that's going to be a problem, right? Or if they don't understand what to do, right? You know what I mean? So influencing is the function that's regarding dealing with people, and then it's almost synonymous with the term leadership. Leadership is like how you're going to exert influence on them to get them to behave the way you want them to behave. For example, I want them to show up to work on time, right? Maybe some people don't believe that they need to do that, right? They believe that they can ignore me and still there's no consequences. I don't know. You know what I mean? Then when they're here, I want them to behave a certain way. I want them to be interested. I want them to feel that they need to do what I say, blah, blah, blah. I want them to be inspired. I want them to want to do what the plan is and what they're required to do. You know, and all this kind of stuff. So that's like what leadership is. It's influencing. Amaze says, how can an introverted leader leverage their strengths to succeed in a leadership role? In what ways can introverts draw on their unique traits to thrive as leaders? Well, this is where kind of I was talking about leaders are, they're made, they're not born, right? And you can look at, like, for example, Bill Gates is a technical introvert. And there's many other examples of introverted leaders. The other one I mentioned that's an introvert for sure is Temple Grandin. You know, you can look at examples of famous introverts that are leaders, right? In the fields of scientific discoveries and in the sciences, a lot of the people that make discoveries, or even the people who make inventions, which are kind of more engineering than science, a lot of them are introverts, right? You know, you can look at the history of scientific discoveries, and like almost to a person, they're all done by introverts. You know, so there's a lot of things there. Now, like I said, to your point, because there isn't like a sort of standard list of traits that everyone needs to be a leader, that means to have influence. You know, you don't need to be extrovert. You don't need to have any of those extroverted traits necessarily. If people look up to you and people are influenced by you because they see what you do and you're a shining example to everyone, you know, that's all you need. So if you are a introverted developer, you write code, you're an IT person, you write code, you know, and you're well known for doing a lot of innovative things with writing code. And a lot of other people who write code look up to you and they sort of copy you. They look to you for how to do things as like a model of what to do. You know, you don't really have to exert too much other than being brilliant and sort of publicizing what you do, right? Does that make any sense? You're sort of asking the question a little bit out of sync to what I wanted to cover, but that's fine. Hopefully that makes sense. Alex says, what's up, bro? I was having a bad day. I'm sorry to hear that, Alex. Well, now that you're here, I'm sure you'll cheer up instantly. You can see my beautiful face, and who wouldn't want to see that? It's like the morning sun. Doxer says also similarities between leadership and management. Well, I already covered that because I covered that leadership is one of the four management functions, essentially. Guido says, how do you handle leadership over more experienced, seasoned people, and especially older people as a younger employee? Oh, that's a great question. So when I started, my first career job was in the railroad, being a coordinator. So like the sort of foreman, as it were, of a gang of, you know, anywhere between 10 and 25, sometimes up to 50 tradespeople. And they were all like, most of them, it seemed like they were the age of my parents at the time. They were in their 50s and 60s. And here I am, I'm like 26 or whatever the hell I am. And I'm telling them what to do. It was a beautiful situation. As you can imagine, they did not look up to me. Like, who's this fresh-faced, clean-cut young man that's like telling them what to do? They've been doing this since before I was born, right? So it could be very tricky. You have to really earn their respect. And it's not like I have all the answers, but what I learned, a couple of things that I learned was they have to respect what you do for them to look up to you. And even if they don't respect like your learning or whatever, they can respect your behavior. So for example, I know this is cliched, but like if you always show up on time, right? Maybe they don't always show up on time. Maybe they're late, you know, on a semi-regular basis. But no, you're always there before everyone else, right? Now, over time, they can't turn around and say, well, you know, Bill is an idiot. Bill's, you know, late some of the time. It's like, no, Bill's always on time. So even if you don't know anything more about me, you don't respect anything more about me, you can at least appreciate that and respect that. So for example, if I demanded that everyone else, you need to stop being late, you need to be here on time. I'm pretty confident in being able to ask that of people because I myself am always here on time, So that might be a silly kind of trivial example, but hopefully it illustrates the point. They may not respect your background. They may not respect you who you are simply because of things like age and stuff like that. But if you show ability or you show behavior, and it's good behaviors and good abilities, maybe something that they don't quite have, it's easy for you to feel confident in saying like, look, I need you to do this. And I don't feel weird at all about asking that because I do that. Right? I hold myself to that standard, so I'm just asking you to do what I'm doing. Don't tell me it can't be done. Don't tell me it's unreasonable. I'm doing it. And everybody sees me do it. So no one's going to back you up on the fact that it can't be done or it's unreasonable. You know what I mean? Different people respond to different things. After a while, you get to know people. And if you talk to them, and they understand more of where you're coming from, you understand more of where they're coming from. Over time, what I found as a general rule, you get more respect for people, and then, you tend to respect each other. That means you tend to listen to each other more. I mean, we could get into details, but does that make sense? That's the way I handled it. There's nothing that I found that you can instantly do that instantly gives you like respect over older people. Because anything that they respect, I wouldn't have. For example, like if they all respected someone who had a Nobel Prize and I showed up with a Nobel Prize, then maybe they'd respect me, despite the fact that I was like half their age. But you know what I mean? I've never been in that situation. I found that the only way to really do it was to get to know these people over time. And you just naturally end up relating to each other more, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we talked about the traits, leadership traits. We talked about how none of them were found to be absolutely essential. Therefore, that changed the entire model of leadership on its head. Instead of thinking that leaders were born, they realized that leaders are made. This was back in the 1950s, and then gradually that principle has spread, all over to what we have today. And then I go on LinkedIn and go on the internet in general, and people are talking about leadership, and they're just like, they're turning it into, some weird other thing, almost like altruism. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. Technically, within business, okay, leadership is being able to get the behaviors from people that you want, right? Now, the problem is that, like I said, people have studied this and written a lot about it over the last several thousand years, usually with in the context of the military, right? So if you're some kind of general or commander or, whatever, you're commanding soldiers, for example, Sun Tzu's Art of War. I can't stand people that quote that book to me in a business context because it doesn't apply. Because, employees are not the same thing as soldiers. For example, if an employee is a good employee and you treat them badly, they can quit. And they do. If they don't like it, they quit. And if they're a good employee, they'll go somewhere else and they'll make even more money. So it's actually a good move for them. Soldiers doesn't work that way. Once you're a soldier in the military, you can't quit just when you feel like it. You know what I mean? There's all kinds of punishments and things like you're deserting or you're going AWOL or whatever. So it's not the same thing. You can use punishments and things like that in the military in ways that you can't do that in business. You know what I mean? So a lot of principles that were conceived of like in a military type situation that talk about leadership, they really don't translate to the world of business. Because the people who make that connection, they just assume that like, soldiers and employees, they behave the same. It's like, nope, no. You try and punish a lot of employees, you'll get some behaviors that are similar. Like people will get uninspired and they'll end up hating you and all this kind of stuff. But you'll also get different behaviors. They'll just leave. They won't voluntarily submit to that kind of treatment. You know, I mean, you can maybe push them a little bit in certain environments, like in the government, where you don't get people quitting left, right, and center all the time. It's, you know, nice cushy job with a pension. You know, people don't quit on the drop of a hat. Is that the expression? Drop of a hat? Do you drop a hat? I don't know. Anyway, well, just on the fly. People don't just quit very often for like government roles, as I understand it. You know what I mean? So if you push people like that, general rule is they won't take it, right? You know, you also have like labor laws and things like that, you know, is like a hard limit. You know, you can't just do what you want. With soldiers, you know, I don't know, maybe the limits are a bit further extended, you know? So those analogies don't hold up. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, they don't hold up for a lot of things, okay? In the military, you can use punishments. You use a combination of rewards and punishments to get people to do what you want. In business, you know, you can use punishments, but there's a lot more problems with it. You know, if you're like paying people astronomical amounts of money so that they don't want to quit, you know, then you can maybe push them really, really hard and make it so it's not fun. And you won't get a lot of people just sort of saying screw it and leaving. But generally speaking, you can't do that. So it has to be done more with rewards and in pulling people towards a goal rather than pushing them. You know, and then you get like in unionized environments, you get like, you know, unions going on strike and stuff. Like that's what happens when you push them too hard. You don't get the behaviors you want. So it amounts to the same thing. You can't really use punishments, you know, like you can in the military. So that's one thing I see. Like everybody they quote from military stuff like Sun Tzu's Art of War, and in my opinion, get it completely wrong. They also quote from sports, you know, like a lot of people that like football, especially in the United States of America, people that are into football, but they're also like in business. They talk about football stuff in a business context. And I'm not into football. I don't know very much about football. But I've heard other people talk about hockey, which I know more about. And it still just doesn't really hold up because it's not the same thing. You could push like $1 million hockey players hard, you know, because they're making millions of dollars, you know. You can't push employees like that. Employees are generally not making $1 million. You know, they're not prepared to submit to certain things, you know, so it just doesn't hold up. Guido says, makes sense. I have a team now. Some people are quite accepting, but others not so much. I don't struggle with the ability part, but more with the authority aspect. You know, when it comes to leadership, when they talk about influencing, a big part of influencing is communication. Even what I was saying earlier, like a moment ago, where I was talking about someone had asked me, I think it was you, Guido, how do you deal with older people? How do you get them to respect you and all this? And, you know, I was saying basically communication. Over time, you get to know them a bit. They get to know you more. Once they see that you're reasonable and that, you know, you have a head on your shoulders and stuff, it tends to sort of break the ice, and they kind of are a little more willing to go along with what you say and stuff like that. They're not pushing back as hard. But basically that's communication, you know, and the more you communicate and the better you know how to communicate with people, generally the easier it can go. You know, like once again, you know, you can make it work without doing a ton of communications. But it helps, you know, it really does help. If you're good at talking to people and, you know, like, for example, one trait that people put down as like a leadership trait, you need this trait to be a good leader, that they found is not absolutely essential, but does help a lot of times. It's a very common trait, is emotional intelligence, right? So talking to people and having some awareness of how you're coming across and being able to pick up on, maybe what they're saying between what the lines of what they're saying, this kind of thing. Reading their feelings as well as their words, you know what I mean? They might say the words because they think it's what you want to hear, but they're really not into it. Being able to detect that kind of thing, that really helps. So influencing and communication go hand in hand, right? Very important. Sanju says, how to deal with micromanagement and sociopathic manager. Good question. It may not be possible. I just want to say before I get into it, I just want everyone to understand it may not be possible to deal with it. They're the manager, you're the employee. You can't go head to head with them and win, generally speaking. There are exceptions to that, but usually they're the one that wins out because they're the manager. That's how it works. So if they've appointed someone who doesn't have a clue how to manage people into a position where they have to manage people, this is a problem that we get. And that's what you see when you put the wrong person in charge. You see all the talented employees just all leave in a short period of time, It really depends. It depends on your personality, what you're prepared to do, what your abilities are, and precisely who this person is and what they're doing, what's going on with them, right? Now, if they're a sociopathic manager, and you mean that literally, I would just run, because you're not going to be able to make that work, and you're not going to be able to phase them. You know what I mean? The only way you can't reason with them. The only thing they would understand is force, and you are already starting from an inferior position. So unless you have some friends in high places or something, it's really hard to force somebody. It's like dealing with someone that is in, the mob or something, like an organized crime. How do you get them to back off? It's you'd have to be stronger than them, very tough, Sometimes you can wait it out and that person eventually leaves or is let go, and you stuck it out and they get replaced with somebody much better, and then the crisis is over, But, if you're a worker and you've got a really, really bad manager, they're a borderline sociopath, psychopath kind of thing, I would just look for other jobs. I wouldn't try and endure it, and I wouldn't try and oust them. You can do all the standard complaints. Usually there's some channels to complain about people in your organization, through HR or whatever. But, you confront the manager about it. You talk to HR about it, get their advice. You talk to the manager's boss about it. Beyond that, that's all you can do. If they're not going to fix the problem or address it, I would say just look for something else, But if it's a micromanager and they're not a psychopath or a sociopath, a lot of times, at least in my experience, hopefully everybody knows what micromanaging is, right? That's when, you don't trust an employee to be able to handle the details. Instead, the manager wants to be involved in all the little details of how the employee does their job, right? They don't trust the employee to be able to handle the details. They need to be involved. So it can be very, very annoying for the employee, and it's also very ineffective for the manager, because what happens is everything bottlenecks through the manager, because the manager has to oversee multiple employees. It's just not possible for them to be involved in every detail of what every subordinate does. It doesn't work that way. So the manager will start slowing down because they can't handle all that workload. So it creates problems for them doing their job, and then it creates problems for the employees. Now sometimes the reason why the manager doesn't trust the employees is because of a real reason. Maybe the manager has been called in to solve the problem of a particular team not working, not being productive or not being effective. So they're coming in with this idea that I'm going to find out what the problems are and I'm going to solve it. And in order to find out what the problems are, I need to get down into the weeds and really understand what people are actually doing and spending all their time doing every day, right? So it's almost like a forensic type of thing where they're auditing what everyone does. Not that they're going to continue like that, but they're going to investigate that. And once they see the whole thing, then they're going to be reverse engineering it. Then they're going to be designing a solution, and then they're going to be coming back to all the employees and saying, here, I know this is what you've been doing in the past. From now on, I want you to do this. And then that's where the micromanaging stops. You make sure the employee can do your new thing, and then you back off. They come in, they fix the problem, and then hopefully they get better results. But if that's not what they're going on, if it's not what they're doing, is because the manager has perpetual mistrust of their subordinates, then there's a problem with the manager. Then, you have to figure out what the root cause of that is. Is it because they're biased against an employee? Is it because they have had bad experiences in the past where they've been betrayed or, something like that by subordinates? So they're carrying that baggage around and then they're projecting it onto you. You know what I mean? Like, you'd have to really look at what the root cause is. But it starts with the employee saying, like, listen, to the micromanager, saying, listen, I understand that you need to be informed. I get that. I've got no problem with that. However, from my perspective, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the fact that, like, I can't just do my job because you want to be involved in every detail. That slows me right down. It also really feels like you have absolutely no trust in me to make these decisions myself. I feel that they're certainly within my capability. I feel like my judgment is perfectly accurate on this, and quite frankly, you insisting upon being involved in every little detail of what I do it's not only frustrating on a personal level, but it's very unproductive in terms of, my workload. And I just want you to be aware of this, because I feel that if this is going to be our permanent arrangement, it's just not going to work, either from a productivity perspective or from a personal perspective for me. It's just not going to work. So I'm okay with doing this for like a temporary thing, but I'm just letting you know that one way or another, I can't do this permanently. It doesn't make any sense. And then let's see what they say. They might say, oh, okay, I didn't realize that's how you felt. Now that I know that you feel this way and you feel pretty confident in doing all this stuff without my involvement, okay, I can certainly back off. It depends what reaction you get, right? But that'll be the first thing to do, would be to, like, sort of go to your manager when you're not pestering them, when they're not, like, it's not the most busy time of the week or something, and doing a one-on-one conversation with them and explaining this, and then just seeing what reaction you get. If they get defensive and hostile, when you feel that, like, I made a very realistic, clear sort of statement, and I did not get what I needed, wasn't very helpful, then you can escalate it. You can go to HR, you can go to the boss's boss, and just ask them how you would like to proceed. Now just be aware, when it comes to stuff like that, they're always going to side with a manager over an employee. That's just how it goes. Okay? The people that put the manager in place are going to side with that manager, even if you're absolutely right. And even if they know you're right, they're not going to sort of slap the manager on the wrist for this. They're going to take it into account. They're going to give the manager another chance, but then ultimately they're just going to see how it goes, kind of thing. Curran T says, where does the line blur between leadership skills being seen as positive traits and threatening to a higher ranked employee? What do you mean? Like the employee's own leadership skills are threatening to them? Is that what you're talking about? I don't see having leadership skills as being threatening to them in any way. It's 100% a good thing, whichever way you look at it. Now, if what they're doing is they're sort of overstepping their role and they're starting to direct other employees or something when they don't have any official authority or permission to do that, then that can obviously be a problem. But just naturally, having traits where you can influence other people, that's not necessarily, that's not a bad thing. I don't see how that would be a bad thing. If you could elaborate, Current T, I'll be happy to go deeper into it. Guido says, micromanagement could be useful during onboarding though, right? Not for the long-term strategy. Yeah, obviously. I mean, when you're training somebody, by definition, it seems a lot like micromanagement. You're not trusting them to just do things. You're kind of verifying everything, and you're observing everything, and you're kind of giving your input, so yeah, it would look like that. But the idea is that, like, part of developing employees is you back off increasingly, right? As the employee demonstrates their ability, right? If they demonstrate their ability and they demonstrate good judgment, they don't need you to be involved. If you're the manager, you have the option of backing off. Now, you can back off in many ways. You can be completely hands-off, right? And just say, get it done. I don't care what you do. I don't need to be involved. Just get it done, right? You could choose to be informed of what they're going to do before they do it and approve it, and then just let them get on with it. You could, or any combination thereof. You could say, you go handle it, and then you ask them what they're going to do or what they did after they've done it. Like there's all kinds of different ways you could sort of delegate things. But the goal is to be able to trust your immediate subordinates and not have to be involved if you don't want to. And in fact, a lot of employees will regard it as a favor if you sort of back off. But you can't back off 100%, because part of what you do, the manager's role is to oversee and to control what's going on. So they need to at least be informed, and they need to sort of have some awareness of what's happening just to steer the ship, right? So you can't completely back off, right? But that's how that stuff works, like with micromanagement and things like that. Current T, what's considered overstepping, to phrase it differently? Okay, so if you're a high-level employee, but you're not the boss, but as a high-level employee, you have a lot of leadership skills, you're influencing other employees around you, other employees are watching you, listening to you, paying attention to what you say, maybe more than the boss, right? The boss might be new. The lead employee might have been there for 30 years. And they're also very charismatic, and they're very knowledgeable. So the other employees naturally would look up to them. And if the boss says, do this, but then the lead employee says, well, what he really means is do this. And everybody goes, oh, okay. So then they follow that person's example. It could be a situation like that. Remember, your like overstepping would be going beyond your official role. You're not in charge of people. You have no responsibility for what your coworkers do, right? If you're put in charge of a team or something, then you're responsible if people do the wrong thing, right? That comes back on you officially, right? If you're a coworker and you have a peer, another employee, and they mess up, they do the wrong thing, and or whatever, officially that has nothing to do with you, right? Now, if they came to you and asked for direction and you told them to do something, then that could come back to you, right? But if there's any doubt and you don't know, you would refer them to the boss. The boss is officially in charge of you and them, right? So overstepping would be you're directing people when you officially are, you're not in that role, and therefore you have no official responsibility if they do the wrong thing. A boss will not like that, because the boss is officially responsible for all the employees. If one employee messes up, does the wrong thing, that's on the boss. The question is going to be asked, like, as the person in charge, why didn't you put a stop to this? And the boss will say, you're absolutely right. It was up to me to find out what's going on and to correct, steer the boat, correct the ship. But my problem is that I have a lead employee that overstepped their authority, and they were giving directives to their peers, and they contradicted one of my instructions, or they did not refer that employee to me when they had a question. Instead, they answered the question, they got it wrong, and now I'm responsible, but really it's them that was doing it. So here's my responsibility. My responsibility is to curb the behavior of that lead employee because they're interfering with my authority, right? So it's going to lead to one of those type of situations. So that would be overstepping. If an employee goes to them for help, that's fine. If they go to them for guidance, that's fine. But they're not allowed to contradict anything that the boss would say, right? Because the boss is responsible. Does that make sense? Demonstrating leadership or initiative. Like, you see, if the lead employee is acting like an agent of the boss, right? They're directing, they're taking charge of things, they're helping their fellow employees, but they're doing all of that the same way that the boss themselves would have done it. They're giving the same advice, same directives, right? Then fair enough, that's fine. But the moment the lead employee starts not doing that, not acting as an agent of the boss, but acting as their own sort of decision-making entity, then there's a problem. That would be overstepping. Current T says, understood. Yeah, that seems very different. You see, for people that have never been like in a management role, the way it works is that the people in charge will appoint a manager. They say, like, you're in charge. And what that means is that you can run generally speaking, in a general sense, across the board, it means you can run this little team or this area of responsibility as you see fit. We are paying you for your decision-making abilities, right? You run it the way you want, and you are responsible for what happens, right? Now, let's pretend there's an employee on the team that doesn't like what the new boss is doing, right? And they complain to the higher-ups. The higher-ups are going to say, like, listen, we understand, you're not happy, it certainly seems like, you make a good case, but, what they're not going to sort of take your side, generally speaking. They're going to say, like, look, we put this person in charge. We gave them the ability to run their little area the way they want. As long as they're not violating company rules or company policy, like it's in black and white, then we would have a problem. But if it's a question of style or, how someone goes about doing this, that's entirely on them. Now, if that means that you're going to leave, I hate to say it, but so be it. We have given them responsibility to run their little area the way that they should, right? Now, there's a flip side to that. Now, if all the employees then leave that group, that's not going to reflect very well on that manager. But we have to give them the rope to hang themselves, like we can't just say you're in charge, but then the moment you make a decision that maybe one person doesn't like, we pull the cord on you and put the brakes on and second guess you. That doesn't make any sense, So that's the unfortunate situation that workers are in, right? This person is in charge. And unless they're like doing a blatant violation of any rule, that's either a company rule or like labor laws or any laws of the land, there's not much you can do, And usually those people, if they're consistently bad, they get their comeuppance, like it's not going to last that long. If they're honestly bad and they do a terrible job, they're not going to be in that role for very long. That's the flip side, And that company is not going to trust them again and give them responsibility again, Obviously, there's exceptions to that, but that's the general rule. So there you go. Listen, if anyone is interested in this kind of thing, okay, I'd recommend that course, okay, because you learn this stuff in business school And that's essentially an MBA. You're getting the same material as in business school. You're getting the same textbooks, the same source material. If you really want to learn this stuff, check out that course, okay, and go deep with this kind of stuff. There's sort of general management is the course to take, and organizational theory is another course to take. They're core components of like a MBA, like a business degree. And then optional stuff, you can go into communication. And communication, for the most part, they teach you more lower level stuff. You know, nothing earth shattering. It's like how to write emails and stuff like that. If you want to learn that kind of stuff, but a little bit more advanced with me, check out that course. That course is purely on communication skills. That's essentially the leadership component. It teaches you how to write, how to communicate properly, but it's more about what response to give in what situation. So I've put all of that into a course. Basically, everything I learned from the journey of being a supervisor all the way up to being a CEO, I put into that course, all the communication stuff. So there you go. There's other things that are not in that course that you have to learn, like financial skills and people management skills. They're not in there, but the communication skills are all there. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you could do a lot worse than check out those things if you want to learn that stuff with me. There's links in the description box for that. Yeah, there you go. We seem to have gotten to the end of the chat. I see there's 24 people here. But this kind of thing, like learning communication, that will probably be the single biggest thing that you can help your corporate career. If you're working, as an employee and you want to climb the ladder and do all that kind of stuff, that's probably the single biggest thing that will help you. There's other components to it too. Like there's the whole like power politics dimension to it. And if you want to learn how that stuff works, that's, like I mentioned, when you study business, the subject of organizational theory, that deals with like power politics, that's essentially the study of how people behave within an organization, right? You have things like psychology. Psychology is kind of like how we think as individuals, right? And then you get sociology, which is like how groups of people think and behave, right? So in business, they teach a core subject as part of any business program, like a Master's of Business Administration. Just like marketing and operations and accounting and things like that, HR type stuff. They have a course called organizational theory or organizational behavior, it's sometimes called, which teaches that. It's essentially a branch of sociology that studies how people behave in organizations like businesses and charities and government and things like that. And all those weirdisms, that you see, like, for example, what exactly is power? Is power the same thing as authority? No, it isn't. Officially, you might have a certain title, but as I'm sure a lot of you guys know, just having a title doesn't necessarily mean that all the employees listen to you, Maybe they listen to someone who's lower down the totem pole from you, like a lead employee. And that person is the one that really has the power, because you can give an instruction, but unless this person sort of endorses it, all the employees will listen to this person. And, only if this person agrees will everyone do what you say. If this person disagrees with you, then no one listens to what you say. They all unite with this employee, and you can't fire them all. You can't impose consequences on all of them. So you're kind of powerless. So this person actually has more power than you, like weirdisms like that you see, and you don't understand that. That's what they study in that field of study, organizational theory. So learning that is really, really cool. All of a sudden, all these things that you see in the world of like business and office politics and in like actual politics, all of a sudden, like it just suddenly all makes sense. For example, you might see politicians and, high-level business people. How can they exert influence on something, but yet not take any of the responsibility when it goes wrong, right? And there's a lot of standard ways of doing that. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, that's the study of organizational theory. So that's the area that kind of deals with a lot of aspects of leadership, right? How to influence behavior, for better or for worse, right? Just all the principles laid out. But that's what they call the area of study. So it's fascinating area. And if you're interested in this stuff, I'd encourage you to learn about that. If you want to learn it with me, it's in that course. It's a component of a business program. Okay, so where were we here? Okay, that was Kieran T's question. Kieran T says, understood. Yeah, that seems very different. What if the decisions the overstepping lead employee made improved the department's performance or something to this effect? What would the response be like? Well, I don't know what the response would be like, but if it did improve the performance of the team, like across the board, there wasn't any negative consequences that the manager had, well, then the manager looks really good because their team that they're in charge of did a good job, right? Now, behind the scenes, it was more the doing of the lead employee, perhaps, who second guessed a lot of the manager's instructions and sort of rephrased them and fitted them for all the individual employees. And that's actually what was done that led to success. But externally, it just looks like the manager's doing a good job, right? And if the manager leaves the lead employee in that role and doesn't put a stop to that behavior, you could argue that, well, they're doing the right thing for the team, right? It may be a bit weird. It's not ideal. You would want the manager themselves to really be the source of the decisions and the instructions, But what it may result in is the manager like recognizing the value of that lead employee if they know what actually transpired. Maybe they were ignorant. Maybe they just thought everybody just did what I said, and it turned out okay. So they get a false kind of feedback. They think that, oh, my original instructions were right on the ball because we knocked it out of the park, and they didn't realize that their instructions were countermanded. It depends, like, whether this is done openly or this is done on the down low, or you know what I mean? Like, it depends on the details to know exactly what the the response or the effect would be. Kieran T says, your follow-up to my question made me wonder about this. A course in power politics really seems interesting. Yeah, like, this stuff doesn't just exist out in the real world. Like, people have studied this, and they've taken. Listen, just speaking from my experience, like, I got an MBA years and years ago, but it's like I went out and became a manager first and then took the education later. And so being in the roles and having experience, that teaches you a lot of stuff firsthand. So then when you go back to school, you see that they're teaching the concepts that you already observed and you already lived and already, but then they go even deeper and further into stuff that you haven't actually seen and you didn't actually know. They take it deeper. So that was what was interesting to me. Like, for example, the thing I touched on 2 minutes ago, where I said you've got a boss who officially is in charge of like a team or a department or something. And then you've got like a sort of lead employee that's very experienced, that's been around there forever. And all the other employees look up to that lead employee, right? Much more than the manager, right? And that gives this person more power than the boss. Even though officially the boss has more authority than this employee, in practice, this employee has more power than the boss, right? So you can see, okay, what are situations where an employee might have more power than somebody technically superior to them on the organizational chart? Well, there's one example, right? But when you study this, they'll say, well, there's 5 sources of power, right? Not just one. You've seen one. There's 4 others, right? Like, another one is access. If this employee is looked up to because they have experience and maybe they're charismatic, maybe this employee has access. They have access to, they're the only one that knows how to use a certain machine, or they're only one that has knowledge of how to do this particular task. So that gives them power. You can't fire that employee or else you lose the ability to do that work or something, They have access to instrumentalities like a machine. They have access to people, that's something you see when you study history. If ever someone is the secretary to a leader, right? The president of the United States or something, whoever books their appointments, that person has a lot of power because you have to go through that person to get to the president or whoever, right? CEOs are like that too. They have executive assistants. Somebody, a C-level officer wants to talk to the CEO. And in order to do that, they're told they have to go through the executive assistant. They have to book a meeting, right? They can't just walk into the CEO's office. They're busy. They have to book a meeting and, oh, look, their schedule is full. I'm sorry. You'll have to come back next week, Meanwhile, another person wants to talk to the CEO. They go right in. That's just, so that gatekeeper has an incredible amount of power. And people have used that, to get all kinds of bribes and all kinds of favors and all kinds of power, So it's a very interesting topic. I learned a ton, and I'd already been like a CEO of a smaller company when I went in to get my MBA. So really fascinating stuff. Antihero says, hello. As someone starting out in law, I'm curious to hear your view from the business side. What would you say makes a young professional, even in law, attractive to top firms? Great question. First of all, you have to network with these people, okay? You have to have access to them, and that's usually the way to do it. As opposed to if, they're shopping around for a lawyer or something, almost like you would open the yellow pages back in the old days. You'd okay, I need a lawyer. Okay, open the yellow pages to law and then start looking at all the law firms, right? You see, there's a million law firms, just like there's a million accountants out there. But if you want your accountant to be really good, what do? You talk to your rich, famous, connected, powerful people that you know. And you say, who's doing your books? And they go, well, for the last 20 years, I've worked exclusively with this guy, or these people. And you go, okay. Can you give me their contact information? I want them, right? Because I could open the yellow pages and I could look at 500 accountants and start going through and, doing hearing their sales pitches and stuff. But it's what's the best sort of testament to who's really good and who's not as good? Who's the accountant that all the CEOs use, or all the business owners use, or all the rich elite people use? They all use this person? Okay, guess who I'm going to, right? That kind of thing. So, listen, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience with lawyers. I have had some experience with lawyers, but not a ton, and I'm quite happy about that. But I believe it works the same, at least what little I've seen of that, it works kind of the same. Who do you use? We use these people. Why do you use them? Because of this. It's okay, could you arrange a meeting? If I wanted to talk to you and them together, could we do that? Sure, yeah. That kind of thing. So number one, you need access to them. Number two, and this is a total guess on my part, okay? I don't know. I'm not in the business of recruiting lawyers all the time, but I would imagine that a lot of things, they would have to understand you and what's important to you as a client, as opposed to the other way around. As opposed to okay, you're hiring the law firm. Well, the law firm says, okay, this is what we need. This is how we do it. This is what we need from you. This is how it's going to work. We don't talk to you first. You wait for your summons. When we have questions, we'll call you. It's a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people, it's well, I don't care what you do. This is how I work. And if you want me as a client, you need to take that into account. So I imagine certainly a factor will be people that get that, like maybe lawyers or law firms that understand that They don't treat the clients like cattle. They very much come in and they listen, and they're attuned to each client wants it. Like, this client wants it done like this. So, okay, sure. I'll do it like that for that client. This other client, maybe they're different personality, different history, different background. They prefer to do it a different way. Okay, I can do that. I won't just assume you want it done exactly like this other client. I'll treat you like an individual. Being able to do that kind of stuff, I think, really matters. It's basically just like a sort of high-level version of customer service, right? So I would suspect that those are two pretty big factors in determining who gets picked and who gets repeat business. Obviously, this is extremely general advice. I don't even know where you are in the world. So, but there you go. For what it's worth, that's my opinion. Take it with a grain of salt, anti-hero. Sanju says, I think in 2025, it's more hard to maintain a job than getting a job. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Now, are there any more questions about leadership and business? I actually have a collaboration, a live stream coming up this afternoon in just less than an hour. We're doing a collaboration again, me and Abby from the YouTube channel Life Work Balance. And I'd like to expand that. I sort of experimented with having a few different people on these live streams, other YouTubers that talk about jobs and stuff like that. So if you're into the whole job thing and you have an opinion about who I should maybe get on there, let me know. And I'll maybe see if I can reach out to them. But that's happening in an hour. So we just answer questions about jobs and stuff like that. Yeah, there you go. Antihero says, I'm from Prague. Okay, right on. I wish there were more mergers in private equity in Europe. Thank you for your answer. You're welcome, Antihero. Yeah, it's a Czech. You see, I used to know this stuff before it split, right? So it was Czechoslovakia, Prague, capital city of Czechoslovakia. But that's split, right? It's Czech Republic, and then it's Slovakia, I guess, right? And is it Bratislava? That's the capital of Slovakia. Is that how that works? Emmy says, introvert alert. Right, well, you come to the right place, Emmy. You know something, Emmy, introverts that learn how to talk to people and can do it, they can really clean up, So, if you're an introvert, don't worry too much about being that. I'm an introvert too. I'm a tactical introvert. That's why I tend to motor mouth and ramble on. And if you notice, my face isn't super expressive, When you talk to a lot of extroverts, they're the ones making all kinds of, expressions and things with their face. Things I can't really do, But if you learn the basics of how to speak to people, you can have a fearsome, effect on influencing others. It's really, you don't have to be an extrovert to learn that stuff. Antihero says, right. Okay, good. I have to think really hard for that kind of stuff. But also, I've seen a few James Bond movies, so that really helps. I think every second movie, it really feels like, it takes place in Prague. So that kind of helps, right? So I've got a very distorted view of what happens in Prague, I think, because of it. Emmy says, navigating office politics, I find it challenging as an introvert. Yeah, I'm sure you don't find it challenging because it's not like that stuff is super complicated. I'm sure you find it tiresome, boring, off-putting. I'm sure that's more, it's not like you can't wrap your head around it. It's just that it's not something you would want to do or are interested in. If I could venture a guess, you tell me if that's accurate or not. Optimus Prime, right on. Yeah, not to date myself, but I thought I think I saw the first and second series of Transformers, the cartoon. And then I think you get the movie, right? And that's when I was out because I was like old. I was old by that point. Yeah, and then Optimus Prime died in the movie, right? So I guess that's all there was of Optimus Prime, unless I'm mistaken. Sanju says, being an introvert is far better than being a pessimist at work. Are those like opposites? That was like the Simpsons joke, right? Springfield's oldest man meets Springfield's fattest man, and the title is Opposites Attract. It's like old is not the opposite of fat, But hey, ignorance is bliss. Auntie here says, have you ever met a CEO you believe was a psychopath? Yes. I mean, look, I don't know, but I mean, I would not be surprised or shocked to learn that a couple of those people were like on that sociopath scale, Not a lot of them, not a lot, but I have met a couple. Really off-putting, really arrogant, and like absolutely no filter, like aggressive, like with no filter, and they don't seem to care. They don't care about people's reactions. So to me, that's my rudimentary understanding of what a sociopath, like it's those kind of traits. Like they don't care about you at all, and they don't feel shame or like self-consciousness about anything. They just say what they want, like no filter. So that's my conception of it. If that's the definition, yes, I have met a few of those people, and it's not a good feeling. Not a good feeling at all. Obsessive Whisper says, have you seen cases where an employee's leadership was mistaken for insubordination? How was it resolved? Yes, I've been on both sides of that, and I've seen it with others. Like, it's hard to really get like an objective view of what's right and what's wrong. I don't think, like, apart from like absolute basic stuff, you can't really say in absolute terms like, oh, that was wrong, or no, that's perfectly fine. It's based on like people's expectations, right? So for example, if you get like a manager or a supervisor or something, and they maybe come from the military, they have a background in the military or something, they expect that, when I tell you to do something, first of all, you show respect, when I'm talking, you don't like look away or roll your eyes or, whatever, or just like, turn around, start talking to somebody else. It's like some people will like be really tuned into that, and then, when I tell you to do something, like it's an order, like it's an absolute thing. Other people, it's much more loosey-goosey, laid back. It's like it's more of a guideline and just kind of a friendly suggestion. So you get differences when different people, they come from one or other environment, and that's kind of what their expectations are, and that's what they're used to. And then you throw them together, and then you see sparks fly. You know what I mean? And I've seen both kind of things. On one example, you got the sort of entrepreneur, sort of startup world where everything's very like inspirational and free and stuff. And then you've got like the sort of rigid corporate world. And as the epitome of that for me was like government, where it's like rules are rules. And even if the rules don't make any sense and no one can explain why the rules are in place, we still have to follow them. But we don't care because that's what we do. We're not paid to think. We're paid to follow rules. And like total polar opposite to places like the startup environment, for like tech startups and things. So, it's just about different expectations people might have. And what's the solution? The solution always is communication. It's about these people getting together and being able to articulate and say, like, listen, I'm sorry if I offended you there. I really didn't mean to do that. Listen, when you say this, my understanding is that you're referring to, you want me to do this. Now, is that incorrect? Because maybe I misconstrued what you were wanting. Something like that. And being able to have those kinds of discussions. And the other person says, oh, I'm sorry. No, I meant this. You see, in my experience, when I give an instruction, this is what I expect, because if I don't get it, then it could lead to this bad situation. And, I've been in those before. And, This kind of thing. So it's about being able to communicate properly like that, knowing how to do it, knowing what to say, knowing when to say it, under what circumstances, being able to do all the sort of emotional, touchy-feely stuff so the other person takes you seriously, doesn't get offended. And then you work through that stuff, and then, then when the two people understand each other, then it goes a lot smoother, It isn't always super easy, though. You can get people that don't respect that, but maybe they do respect a show of force. So almost like a bully kind of mentality, where the manager will bark out instructions. They won't seem to care about their employees that much or their employees' feelings. But then if an employee calls them on it and says, like, damn it, you don't get to talk to me like that. When you say this, are you saying this? Is that what you're saying? Because, we're going to have a problem, and they get called on it. They get taken aback. And then so like, okay, I'm not going to antagonize that employee. I'm going to treat that employee with a little more respect because I know it's going to come back to me if I don't, right? So you get a bit of that stuff too, Sometimes with some people, that's what I learned early on when I was in the railroad. It was like some people, they just act like bullies, and the only thing they understand is force. If they bully you and they, intimidate you or they insult you or whatever, threaten you, whatever it is, I've had all of those things. The only thing that you can do that would stop that behavior is you go back and you make them feel pain. You get right in their face and you yell at them or, whatever. That's the only thing that would like curb their behavior. They would like actually treat you with respect. And I know that's far less than ideal, and I wouldn't recommend that. But, in some environments, that's kind of the only thing that I ever found that worked. And I tried like everything else with some people. I think I did I do obsessive whispers? Have you seen case where employees' leadership was taken for insubordination? How is it resolved? Did I actually answer that? I can't even remember. I think I did. I thought I did. Like, that's when the employee is like giving instructions and it's not really their job to do that. So that was similar to a question I got earlier in the stream. Basically, the bottom line is if you're helping people and you're giving guidance or instructions, but you're acting like an agent for the boss, you're saying what the boss would say if that person asking for help had come to the boss, then it's fine. But if you're giving your own sort of direction that differs from the boss, they're not going to like that. They're going to regard that as a problem. They might even regard it as insubordination. Insubordination just means that people didn't obey you. They disobeyed an order, right? That's what that means. So you can call it whatever you want, but in order for it to be true insubordination, the boss has to say, I need you to do this now. And then for whatever reason, the employee doesn't do it, right? That's technically what insubordination is. And for how was it resolved, you can get an entire range of ways insubordination is resolved, up to and including termination. I resolved it by getting rid of that employee. Usually it's, once again, some form of communication. Sometimes it's communication with a bit of force. It's official communication. You're called to the office. There's an HR person there with the boss. It's all done in writing. This is the problem. This is what we've decided. HR is witnessing your reaction. You are aware that we think this. We're giving you notice. This is the behaviors we need to see changed. All that stuff. No, that's not particularly fun stuff. Motivation TV says, hello, sir. I'm from Pakistan. I got a Malta job offer. Please tell me how is Malta. What? Please tell me how is Malta and its work. Well, it's an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, and it was bombed heavily in World War II, and its capital city is Valletta. And you should do your own research on the country and how its work is, and you should talk to someone who is an expert in Malta and perhaps arranging some kind of work emigration from Pakistan to Malta. That's not me, unfortunately. Peter says, could you please explain what a backfill position is? Does that mean the person has been fired? That's not an official term. That can mean a whole bunch of different things because it's an informal kind of thing. That could mean someone that's filling in for a permanent, like it could be a temporary employee filling in a temporary capacity for an employee who's temporarily gone. Maybe they're on reduced duties. Maybe they've been transferred. Maybe they're on maternity or paternity leave. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're on vacation. Maybe there's, an increased workload that needs to be taken care of. They haven't yet hired permanent staff to handle it, so they're bringing in a temporary person just to fill an immediate need, right? So it also has more specific meanings within the context of unions. They'll have their own lingo for like what those terms like backfill, it might have a more official meaning, but I don't know what that is, and I'm sure it's a non-standard thing anyway. So that's as much as I can really be helpful on that. Hopefully that was somewhat useful. It doesn't necessarily mean the person has been fired. Okay, at least not across the board. Maybe in certain industries, maybe they use that term to mean that, but generally speaking, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're replacing someone who's been fired. It could, but not necessarily. Motivation TV says, hello, sorry, I'm from Pakistan, I got a multi-job. Yeah, you're just repeating the same thing. Peter says, what is your opinion on taking leadership at work and doing something outside of your responsibilities? What do you mean by taking leadership? You mean you're in a job, you've got certain official duties. On top of those, you have informal duties where you have to do whatever the boss says within reason. But you're going above and beyond on your own initiative. You're just deciding to do extra stuff. Now, if you're going above your official job responsibilities, first of all, before we even get into what you're doing, are you advising your boss that this is what you're doing? Are you asking permission? Or are you just going ahead on your own initiative and doing things? Sometimes you can do both. Years ago in one of my early jobs, I think I was at the railroad, I actually wrote a software program in like Visual Basic or something that automated a lot of the work that we did in our job. And I didn't ask for permission. I didn't say I was doing this. I sort of went and did it for myself. It was like some kind of dashboard that we had. Like it was like running like Windows 2000 or something. I don't know. And or Windows NT or whatever we were using. And I did this dashboard thing. And I used it for myself. I sort of like installed it on my computer and then I put it on everybody else's computer and automated their jobs. And then I went to the boss and said, like, here's what I've done. I think you should make it mandatory because 3/4 of the employees are using it anyway. And if we just got that last bunch using it, then there would be some advantages. It would be consistency across the board and everything would be done the same way and, blah, blah, blah. And I remember the boss talking to the manager talking to the assistant manager and saying, well, who told him to do this? And the assistant manager was saying, well, nobody, he just went ahead and did it. And but they eventually adopted it, and that helped get me a promotion eventually. But so you can do stuff like that, and you don't have to ask for permission, depending on the details. Right? It is possible to do that. But then again, I mean, in some situations, it may not make any sense to do that kind of thing. In my example, I did it because I was so pissed off having all these tasks I had to do be so manual. And like I was an electrical engineer, I knew the basics of programming and all this kind of stuff. So I knew how to automate things. So I just went, it was just frustration of like having to do this stupid manual way of doing things when one could easily automate it, So I did it to make my life easier, my job easier. It freed me up to do like other things during my day. And like that, like that's how it started for me, at least for that thing. You can do that, but it's better to, in my opinion, it would be better to talk to your boss, generally speaking, and get more of a closer relationship and understand kind of when they ask you or all the employees to do something, where they're coming from, why are they asking it to be done that way? Do they care about how precisely you do it, or this way or versus that way? Like learn a bit of that stuff, and then it's like a lot more clear. And then you could even say like, well, if I could come up with a way to do it, to do that thing you just mentioned in this way, would that be okay? And if they give you permission to do it, they say, sure, if you can come up with something better, that can really be good. And then you go ahead and deliver on it. And then, that there could be advantages for you. So yes, you can do that. Does it always make sense to do that stuff? No. Will you always get like a payback or some kind of payoff? No. But it will make sense some of the time in certain situations. Obsessive whispers. Yes, you answered. Okay, great. Good. Peter says, please kindly revise your view on the military leadership. It is not all about yelling. There is a significant people management component. Yeah, listen, I've never been in the military. I don't have any opinions on it. I believe I was saying an example of a person that has a different leadership style from someone else. So as an example, I said maybe somebody comes from the military and they're used to yelling or something. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not making any statements about the military, so sure. Anyway. Okay, well, we've been doing this for an hour and a half. Hopefully that was useful. There's 19 people here. Thank you for being here. Hopefully you got something out of this. Not too much about side hustles and entrepreneurship, but this stuff is actually important if you're trying to get partners. Like a lot of people that are entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, they fully investigate like getting partners involved from an early stage. And I've found that those are among the most challenging types of, business relationships, because, everything you do at work, you're compensated for, you get paid, right? In a startup type situation, if you're starting a company, there isn't like, payment, there isn't like compensation, at least not in the conventional sense, and not at the beginning. So it's like it's almost like a volunteer type situation, where people are doing it entirely for personal reasons, for like self-actualization goals and things. And they're agreeing to work together, presumably because they have different skill sets. Maybe somebody's strong in a technical area and somebody's strong in a sort of marketing sales area, and so if you could combine their skill sets, it would work really well together. However, it does require a lot of trust. I don't know anything about sales, but I'm pretty confident that you know more about it than me. So when you tell me to do something that I kind of think is kind of fishy, doesn't seem right to me, but I trust your opinion on it, that's hard to get when nobody's being paid, but you yet have to do a ton of work. So I've found those relationships to be like among the most challenging of all business relationships. So that's why maybe some of these leadership skills might come in handy in an entrepreneurship type situation. Being able to talk to people, understand where they're coming from, do it in a way that it's not like you're accusing them of anything. It's still a pleasant conversation they want to have. It's pretty important stuff, if you're trying to like build those strong relationships that you'd have with a partner. And that's, like, if you can do that, it's a pretty lofty goal, but if you can do that, then there's an incredible payoff, usually, if you can make that stuff work. Okay, if you want to go deeper with me, as always, check out this course. Okay, that's to learn business. There's a link in the description box. Talks about it. Also, I've done videos on it, so it's as transparent as possible. You can see what you're getting, how it works. This one also, I think, would be of some interest to people if you want to learn that stuff with me, which I recommend. Basically, into that course, I put everything I learned about communication skills on my journey from going from a supervisor to a CEO. So if that's of any use to you and you want to be seen as a contender for, management type jobs in a conventional career, or you want to learn that kind of stuff that will help you as an entrepreneur to create relationships with other players in your industry or anything like that, any of the myriad people you've got to actually interface with, check that out. Okay, that will help you. Once again, link in the description box under this live stream. And I've done videos explaining the course and how it works and what you get, so it's as transparent as possible. Other than that, I will be back next week, same time, with another edition of Side Hustle Ideas. And I will be back in half an hour on this channel with a collaborative live stream talking about job search. So thanks very much. You guys are awesome, and I'll see you soon. Take care.